I would like to introduce my boss, Mark Brillo, who is Director of Environmental Health and Safety for Viacom.
I'd also like to welcome you, and the weather out here is similar to what Pittsburgh is right now. Cold, wet, but it's nice to be out here on the West Coast. A couple of things I wanted to say before we get started on it. We're talking about compliance to a specific standard, and this standard took several years to come about, and unfortunately it came about because of an accident in the state, in the LA region. And the compliance part is, you're meeting the minimum standard. What OSHA puts out is the minimum standard. You have to meet that, but that doesn't mean that you can't go more than just compliance, and we expect you to do more. If you see something that's not listed from the standard standpoint that you know needs to be fixed, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your friends, you owe it to coworkers to point it out and fix it or call it to someone's attention. Just like Paul says, if there is some situation from a standpoint of something, a safety issue, Wendy's out here on the West Coast, she is responsible for all the West Coast. I have responsibility for all of Viacom. That means all the different businesses, not only CBS and Infinity, but Viacom Outdoors, Paramount Parks, Paramount Pictures, and so on, where I interface with them. So I carry some of the lessons learned from each organization and some of the standards that cross over. OSHA has their regulations. The federal government will probably pick this up because it is a complete regulation in ENG operations. So they're going to probably pick it up when, I don't know. There's some people from outside the state that's come in for the training, which is excellent, because two things. One, it's going to carry over. And so the more you learn, the quicker you can get it in operation and can save a life. The other one is if you operate outside of the state line and you come in to California, you're expected to follow the state rules, which means you would have to have all the updates, all the upgrades, all the training, and so on. Hopefully everyone picked up one of these summary. Now what we did on this was we summarized the standard. If you ever read one of those standards, they're all in legalese. They're very difficult. It took me several times to rewrite this to try to make sure I understood what it is. But the first part talks about the requirements of the standards. Some of them are with training and inspections. The other part is the upgrades, and you have until in certain cases you'll have till the end of December 18th of 2004. But we'll be doing that later on. We'll be talking about as far as doing your training for all your people in August, meaning that in the following quarter you're going to have the inspections done. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. If you look on the third page of this was the overall plan that I put together just for implementing the plan. What I thought we needed to do: identify individuals to do the training, identify what their duties are going to be, coordinating the activities, the upgrades, the other inspections, retaining all the records so that you can prove that this has been done. This is very important, because when do you need that record? When I come around and do an inspection? Sure. But usually when you really need it is when there's an accident. And somebody said, well, was he trained? And I said, well, yeah, he's been doing this for 20 years. Well, was he trained? And if you don't have proof, sometimes that person's not around to answer that question, you get in trouble. So it's very important to keep your records together. Some of the other things that are coming down the pike is the federal OSHA has opened up the walking, working surface standards in the general industry. And that has to deal with fall protection. Some of the things that you have on the ENG truck, sometimes you'll see people, or I understand there's some people that work off the roof of that van, either for extended period of time. This new standard, or this upgrade of this existing standard, will come into effect. It also will come into effect on the walking, working surfaces on fall protection for our radio and TV towers. It also comes into effect on our Viacom outdoor businesses or billboards. It'll come big time for that industry. We're going to be talking a little bit Vince is going to be talking a little bit about work zone safety, and that was a result of an incident that occurred, I shouldn't say it like that, the incident occurred out in New Jersey on one of our other businesses, and OSHA adopted some of the activity that generally was done with construction and maintenance on the roads and said, hey, you know, you guys that work on the side of a road that could interfere with the normal flow, you come under the standard if you meet certain requirements. So we'll talk about that. It's in your manual. Vince will talk a little bit more, and if you have any questions about that, we can discuss it. And thank you again for coming, and if there's any questions at any time here or after, we'll be around.
So I've given you a bunch of things. The one thing I gave you was a silver binder. It's kind of stiff. That has the safety manual that we're going to be discussing here today. You're also going to be adding, that is going to have to be put in each and every vehicle that you have that has a raising mast. So your SNGs, your ENG, your electronic field production, anything that has a mast that raise, that actually goes in there. So the safety manual will be in there, and then you'll have to put the owners and operators manuals in those as well. I'm also going to give signs to the people who are in charge of the vehicles to post in the vehicles. It'll be a danger sign that's posted near or on the mast. There will also be some signs that will be posted at the driver's section that will state how high the mast is when it's lowered and when it's lowered but not stowed, and then when it's stowed. And then there'll be another sign that has to go in the back that's what is the total height of the mast when it's raised, so that you are all aware of that, okay? So those will be given to the people and put on the actual vehicles. That gray binder will go in there. We'll discuss the safety manual today, so you'll need to have that. There's also another binder. It's either blue, it's a soft binder, it's either blue or white that I gave you. That has the PowerPoint presentation that you're going to see. It'll also have a CD-ROM of the PowerPoint presentation. That's what you'll use to train your people, okay? That's what you'll use as trainers.
So let's just go with some of the basics then. When you take that disc, you're going to open it up, and it's basically going to have you're going to see this top portion of this when you open up the disc. If you click on the Final Pack CBS folder, does everybody see that at the top? The bottom folder is going to open up. All you have to do is click on PNG Setup and follow the prompts, and it will install the PowerPoint presentation and all the video clips that you're going to see onto your hard drive, okay? At the top where it says CBS PowerPoint slide handout, I would suggest that you print that. What that is this. And it'll make a nice handout for the people that you're going to be doing training. I'm just going to spend 2 minutes going over some real basics with PowerPoint. For those of you that are familiar with PowerPoint, please bear with me. Basically, when you open up PowerPoint, you're going to see these 4 or 5 icons down at the bottom. To get into the presentation mode, you click that one. That looks like a big screen. What I also did was I put cheat notes on here. What the cheat notes is like this. Whenever you're doing a 2-hour presentation, there's no way you're going to remember everything you're supposed to say. So if you click on the cheat notes, it'll tell you what I think should be covered there. What I would suggest to be an effective trainer is that you go through these. Take a look at it and modify it where you feel it best suits the particular station or the particular group that you're going to be training during this presentation. If you don't like a particular slide, for example, there's some slides on winter safety here. If you're from San Francisco and you really don't have much of a winter exposure, all you have to do is find the slide that says winter. There, well, whatever slide it is. There's one for wind chill factor. You just click on it once to highlight it, and you click the right mouse button, and you go down and click Hide Slide. Then that slide will not show when you do the presentation. So now to start the presentation, all we're going to do is click on it with the left mouse button, and then go down here and click the slide projector. And that basically starts the presentation. To advance the slide, all you do is you click the left mouse button. Now let's say you hit the mouse button twice because you screwed up. Like, oh, I don't want to be there. I want to be on the first slide. All you do is you click the right mouse button. And you go up to where it says previous. Click the left mouse button, and you're back to where you started. Okay? Now that's a real rough overview of what PowerPoint is. If you want to make changes in the words, all you do is you go down and you don't like this, you just click on what the words are, and you type what you want it to be. Okay? Does anybody have any questions before we actually get started in the training program portion of this presentation? If you have any trouble, just give Wendy a call, and if she can't answer it, I'm sure she can get a hold of me, or you can get a hold of me. But anyway, that's the introduction to PowerPoint. My name is Vince Baudo. I work for a company called Risco, which has just been sold, so I'm not exactly sure which company name I'm going to be working for in the future. Risco is owned by CBS, or CNA, which is the insurance company for Walt Disney. We have been providing training for ABC and their network-owned stations as an organization for probably 5 years. What you're going to see is a compilation of some things that we've done with them in the past, but obviously we CBSized it and Viacomized it, is that a word, to basically fit the objectives here in the presentation. How was this program developed? One of the things that we did was we took a look at the presentations that we were developing in the past, and we said, hey, we trained them. We showed them what we were supposed to do. We're still having these accidents. What's going on? So we spent a lot of time. I visited about 8 stations. I did ride-alongs with crews at 8 different stations all across the country. I interviewed them one-on-one to get each of the employees' perspective, to get the desk and the assignment person's perspective as to what are the root causes that are contributing to these events. And that's where this presentation came from. Since you're trainers, by all means, stop me at any time. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. And obviously, one of the things we also did was we modified this presentation to meet the Cal OSHA requirements. So with that in mind, what are our objectives today? Well, our objectives today, number one, are to talk about some safety fundamentals. And you may say, oh man, but that's actually one of the more important segments of this presentation in my mind, because it talks about why people do the things that they do. And until you address why, the likelihood of these events happening in the future is still going to be there. We'll talk about some ENG safety procedures, many of which are pulled right out of the CBS UPN Infinity ENG Safety Manual. And we're also going to talk about some other ENG work-related hazards. In the one of the points that I would like to make is sometimes people don't like some of the topics that I picked. The only thing I'll say there is if you look at the California law, certain topics are required under this presentation. So you're going to get, well, what are you talking about poison ivy for? Well, environmental hazards and hazards associated with plants are one of the things you're required by law to say. So anticipate that question because you're going to get it. So we're going to talk about some other ENG-related work hazards. We'll talk a little bit about safe employee behaviors. One of the biggest weaknesses that most trainers have when they do safety training or any training is they don't tell the audience what the expectations are as a result of this training. I've gone through training where you go in, you show people a hazard communication video, and these people leave, they sign a piece of paper, but they don't have a clue about the hazards of the chemicals that they actually work with. So what good was the training? It didn't accomplish anything. So what we want to do is establish what our expectations are as a result of this training, and hopefully foster a continuous improvement dialogue. Because if we don't talk about what the root causal factors are that contribute to these events, we're never going to prevent them from happening. Lastly, some of you may be on a tight schedule. There is a course evaluation guide in the back of the book. In the back pocket. If you would, fill it out along the way, because I'd like to know if there are things that we can do better that perhaps you would like to see. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about some safety fundamentals. And what's one of the biggest misconceptions that a lot of people have, and maybe it's an accurate misconception, when they hear they're going to safety training. They think, oh man, I'm going to sit there, I'm going to watch a video, I'm going to learn stuff I already know, like lift with your legs, and then I'm going to go out and do things the way I've always done them anyway. And that's the perception that a lot of people have. when they attend safety. And our culture tells us and dumbs down safety for us. What do they? You watch a car commercial. What's that car commercial say? Don't operate it like this. Like, duh, I'm going to go home and do that, right? You know, I just bought a pack of scissors. Has anybody bought scissors lately? There's actually warnings on them now. And what does it say? It says, don't run with these. You learned that in kindergarten. But our society so dumbs down safety that we're getting inundated with this. And since I probably didn't give you all the warnings, that was just a stunt person on a PowerPoint presentation. So let's start with the basics. What is an accident? What's an accident? You know, a lot of times people think safety, man, that's a really exciting profession. Well, here's me reading the dictionary.
An unexpected, unpredictable, undesirable event that leads to injury and/or property damage.
Now, you're going to hear something that you probably never thought you were going to hear. Everybody thinks they know what they're going to hear in a safety meeting. You're going to hear something I bet you didn't think you were going to hear. Accidents, because they're unexpected and unpredictable, are impossible to prevent. That's a crapshoot. How do you prevent something that you can't predict and you don't know what's going to happen? And that's a perception that a lot of people have with accidents. And our society tells us, hey, that's so. What do we say? His number came up. He's accident prone. He's in wrong place at wrong time. We even give these people nicknames. We call them Sparky or Clod or Unlucky. Or who's got a good name? Somebody, you got a good name, I know you do. But the point you really want to make here when you're doing the training is, are we as an industry having accidents at all? Or are we really having predictable events? Are we really having predictable events? What do I mean? I'm going to give you some examples I use when I do the training, but I really would like you to pick your own. Some of the examples that I've used in the past. Is it an accident or a predictable event that if we're racing to a breaking news story and we're speeding and following too close, is that an accident or predictable event when we rear end somebody? And if we decide to go up and do a live shot off the roof because we think it might give us a better shot, is that an accident or predictable event that somebody's going to fall off? And if we have an overzealous assignment desk who's on somebody to get out there and get the story on, is that an accident or predictable event when people take shortcuts? Is it an accident or a predictable event? Think about it. If we have people that are trying to get into the organization and they think, I know I'm not going to get called back, the freelancers especially, I know I'm not going to get called back if I don't get the story on the air. Is that an accident or predictable event when he takes all kinds of shortcuts? And hopefully you're going to draw out some specific examples that relate to your station. Why are we here? Why are we here? We're here because as an industry, we are having way too many accidents. And don't take my word for it. If you take a look on page 2 to 6 of the handout that is in the book, you'll see hazard alerts. This one's from Maryland OSHA. Talks about the hazards that they don't think are being adequately managed associated with ENG operations. And we're even out of the country. Here's Ontario, Canada. Fatality alert, published because the government of Ontario didn't think adequate regulations and safety controls were in place. And probably most damning of all, the state of California on page 6. Cal OSHA thought it was necessary to publish Article 40. Why? Is it because these things are just happening? Or is it because we as an organization and as an industry are not managing safety as effectively as we need to? And here's where, as trainers, I'm going to sound like Sybil because I'm going to be stepping back and forth. Here's where you want to solicit input from employees as to why are these happening? And what are the root causes? One of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make with safety training is they don't identify the root cause. Somebody gets hurt. A supervisor goes out and investigates it. What's he do? He finds out that the employee error. was the problem. So what's he say? He tells the employee to be more careful next time and makes him watch a video. Does that ever fix anything? But if you identify what were the management causal factors that allowed this to occur, then hopefully we can identify procedures and behaviors that we expect so these events aren't going to happen again. So here's what I would suggest that you do is have a flip chart and try to get people's input as to why these events are happening. One of the responses you're going to get is those people were just idiots. Everybody knows. You don't stick the mast up if there's overhead lines. You're going to hear that, right? And the way I answer that question. I say, well, who's smart all the time? Who's never, ever made an error before? Who's always sharp? Up, up, up. Come on, let me see your hands. There's one guy. All right. And that's why safety management always builds redundancy in everything. Because we know at times we're not going to be sharp. Safety trainer. Here's mine. I went and rented a rototiller about 5 years ago. 3 big guys. I'm not that big. I don't know if you noticed. But anyway, 3 big guys put this thing in my trunk. I went to get the neighbors. Not home. What do? I lift it out myself. And down for the count. So we're not always sharp and we're not always on the ball. And certain things create this. And that's my intro, and to try to record some of the events that cause people to do the things that they do. Maryland Ocean, that handout I gave you, said these accidents are happening because we want to get set up quick, or there's pressure, either real or perceived. And that perceived pressure really interested me, because I've done this training where we've had field people and assignment desk people, and the field people are saying, man, there's all kinds of pressure. And the assignment desk person's saying, hey, well, that's part of the business, but I'm not giving any undue pressure. And it's really good to get both perspectives into the same group, if at all possible, because I think it really alerts both sides to what the challenges are. I've actually had people where they were talking to the assignment desk person or the editors saying, well, geez, it takes me 10 minutes just to get the mast in the air. And they didn't know that. So maybe that's where some of this undue pressure is actually coming from. Which leads us to safety truth number 1. Accidents are tough to prevent, but predictable events are easy to prevent. They can be prevented and controlled. How? Here's where, and I'm stepping out, you would want to ask the audience, how do we really prevent these things from happening? And try to get them to say some of these things. By establishing minimum policy, but not just any old safety policy that's in a manual that nobody looks at, but actually policies that are expected to be implemented 100% of the time. Identify what key behaviors we need from the employees. And set up systems to audit and monitor that we're getting those behaviors. And set up a culture that enforces that under no circumstances do we deviate from these safe behaviors. Just like we're on there at 5, 6, and 11, we're going to get these expectations 100% of the time. They're critical safety behaviors that can't be deviated from. What is that? That's a safety culture. Here's a story I usually use to talk about what a safety culture is. You can pick your own if you want. My first car, Chevrolet Vega. Who remembers that? All right. Are you picturing fine quality automobile? Who's got that? Anybody got that picture in their head? Or are you picturing like a rolling turd? Because that's what it was. It was a rolling turd. And who knows what was Ford making at the time? Pinto. Safe, quality automobile. Anybody got that picture? And what happened? Japan came in right around that time and kicked the hell out of us as an industry. Why? They had a different manufacturing model. What was their model? Everybody's got quality responsibilities, and everybody's got quality training, and everybody's responsible for performing the job in this manner. And we're going to establish responsibilities for quality, because our goal is 100% quality, 0 defect. What was the U.S. policy? My job's to get the car down the line. It's somebody else's job for quality. What model are we as an industry following? Is safety everybody's job? Or is my job is to get that news story on the air and safety is their job? What model are we following? In many instances, I think we're still following the U.S. car model of the 70s. So try to talk about that and talk about how that's not true any longer and how going forward is certainly not going to be true. And that's where some of the safety regulations and objectives of this training are going to come into play. Perhaps some of you have seen this, some of you may have not seen this. This is basically Safety 101. What it says is for every 641 events, there's only going to be one significant accident. 600 times, it's going to be a near miss, nothing's going to happen. 10 times, it's going to be minor property damage, minor first aid, cut, bump, neck. 30 times, maybe a little property damage, but nobody gets hurt. And the vast majority of the time, you can commit unsafe acts and get away with it. And we all know this. And what happens when you get away with it? Usually you get a reward. I got done quicker. I got the story on the air on time. Do you ever watch people drive? How many do you see people? I actually saw this one guy. He was on a cell phone, jotting things down, steering wheel between the knees. You see that? He's getting rewarded. Why? He's getting his work done faster, and he's getting to where he's got to be. And he's thinking, this is great, because why? He continues to get away with it. And then one day, he's not. Now, as a trainer, you want to talk about what are we doing? We don't even see it as hazardous anymore. Tying the mast control switch up. Not selecting a proper location. What are we doing live shots off the roof? Driving too fast. Try to get the group to talk about how we're playing this game. And then talk about how maybe in the old days the cowboy was the desirable employee in the broadcast news industry, but that's the employee that'll get you killed now. The best employee nowadays is the employee that basically knows that they're not to deviate from safe work practices, because the liability and the potential for accidents are intolerable now. Accidents are caused by unsafe behaviors. What's my point? The point is, if you can identify what these unsafe behaviors are and get people to adopt them a la the Japanese, we can eliminate these unsafe behaviors. But we need a culture that says we don't deviate from these. It's unacceptable to deviate from these. Do we have this culture now? And here's where, again, you'd want to get input to try to get everyone's perspective. Justice Powell talked about the value that the press has with respect to the important role that we play with the First Amendment. Does that lead us to rationalize that it's okay to do safety shortcuts? Or do we just want to kick the hell out of ABC and NBC? And here's again where I'd want to get, you want to get some input, and then you want to basically say, not if we have a safety culture. And if I get you to learn anything, if we do the things as an industry we've always done, we're going to get the things we've always got. And what we have always got as an industry has not been good enough. We can't just continue to do things the way we've always done. And that's why best-in-class organizations identify what their key performance and behaviors are, and they're embraced. They're not fought. Which leads us to our safe work practices manual. Now maybe you're looking at safety in a little different light. It's not just some stupid warning on the cup of McDonald's. It's just not another manual to stick in the file. It's just not another stupid warning. The challenge here is getting people to buy in that the entire organization expects these behaviors 100% of the time. And as effective trainers, you need to convey that message. That yeah, we got an important thing to do, and yeah, we got time schedules that we're going to be under, and there's always going to be a crunch, but we don't deviate from these procedures and these behaviors. And that's the key, that message that you need to send across. I love what you did coming in here and talking about it from a management perspective. Anytime you can do that, that's great. Simply because a lot of times people think, well, yeah, that's just safety saying that. But in reality, it's everyone saying that. With that, we're going to get into some of the basics
where
on
Al
ENG
Battle
safety.
passed away. He was a 20-year veteran of CNN, and this is how he lost his life.
Get out of there! Get him out of there! Now! Yeah, there might be some. What the hell's in there? God damn. Right! Call 911! Call 911 now! I'll come across.
It's a terrible situation, and if you ever saw a situation with, like Al, I tell you, it really gets your attention.
Here's another example from Pittsburgh. Another van parked underneath a power line.
And the whole purpose for showing that video and the message you want to convey is there are certain hazards associated with what we do that the magnitude of the risk is just too great to deviate, no matter how important the story is. Here's another one from 1997.
September of 1997.
The Channel 5 reporters probably never knew what hit them. David Bingham was conscious on the scene but badly burned. Kimberly Arms, also badly burned, was unconscious. One of them raised this tall microwave mast that extends from the top of their live van. It touched a power line along Franklin Avenue. That's when 13,000 volts shot through the van and the crew.
And that's why if there's one behavior we need 100% of the time is that we need to maintain safe clearances to overhead lines, as this video illustrates.
He puts it best by saying the safest distance to a power line is 10 feet for the first 50,000 volts, with 4 inches added for each 10,000 volts above that. Maintain the 10 feet and double it if you're not sure. Here at KSTP, the rule of thumb is basically 3 truck lengths or 30 feet between your mast and a power line. How do you do that? Just figure out the length of your truck times 3. That's the easiest way to do it.
Now when you click, I should have told you this, now I'm stepping out. If you click here to advance the slide, you're going to play the video again.
The safest
You
distance
want
to
to
a power
click
line.
down outside the video, okay? Which leads us to our first set of key safe employee expectations. That our vehicle is located a minimum of 10 feet from overhead lines, and that maximum extension of the mast was considered when sitting the vehicle. It's a 100% expectation. And here's where you have the CBS manual, and you actually, what I suggested to do is have them highlight some of the key sections that are in that manual. For example, the manual says we don't park where our power lines are overhead, we don't park next to the curb adjacent to utility poles, and if the only feasible location from where we want to do the live shot is across the street, then that's where we set up. And those are some of the key things that are in the safety manual. What you want to do is to tie this training program and these behavior expectations into the ENG manual so that people get a greater familiarity with it. 10 feet. That's what it just said. Well, can I just use the 10 feet rule? Well, if you take a look at that MOSH hazard alert, it says no. Why does it say no? And here's where you try to get people to respond. And what you're looking for is you can't always judge the distance as the mast goes up in the air. The incline or the pitch of the road may cause the mast to go closer. Wind may cause the mast to sway into a direction that you don't know about. Your visibility may be hampered. Fatigue may be setting in, so obviously you want to build a safety factor in. At night, sometimes it's tough to see. You want to try to get all of these group challenges so that they answer this question on their own, that it's not acceptable to just have 10 feet in most instances. And here's where, again, you'd highlight what the CBS manual says. Here's what the CBS manual says. That minimum distance allowed between the elevated masts and power lines is 15 feet, and as the slope increases, so does the minimum slope. This is on page 8, at least it was on page 8 of mine. And it says for every 5 degrees of slope, you have to add an additional 5 feet clearance. Now your next question as a trainer is 15 feet always enough? Not necessarily so. Here's what the OSHA standard says. From 600 to 50,000 volts, you need to maintain 10 feet of clearance. From 50 to 75,000, 11 feet, etc. First question you want to ask the group is, well, can you tell by looking what the voltage levels are? A group that has some understanding of power lines will say you can get a pretty good idea. They'll tell you, well, yeah, number of porcelain insulators will give you a good idea as to what the voltage levels are. The higher the line is usually an indication that it's a higher voltage level. That hum that sometimes you hear when you're on high voltage lines will be a good parameter. But the best practice that I see, and I don't see this in a lot of stations, is where we actually get somebody from the utility in to identify in the main broadcast areas or territories that we cover, where are these high voltage lines where we're going to need additional clearance. And if you can get that information as trainers, that would be great to come in here and put another slide in and say, here's where they are. Incidentally, that warning at the top left is now mandated by the state of California, and I believe Wendy has something similar to it on the table.
It says danger.
Okay. This one was taken out of your vehicle before, but we should have not had warning. We should have used the danger to it. And that leads us to our next employee expectation, that 100% of the time we meet the requirements of that table. Now, incidentally, I threw in sound to keep people awake. If you don't like the sound, or if you don't think your group is going to like that sound, there's a simple way to take the sound off. Instead of explaining it, call me, and I'll tell you how to do it, okay?
Satellite shots can be just as dangerous as microwave shots. We have the microwave mast up and the satellite dish up for this shot for different reasons, but I won't go into that. But we have to check safety on all counts. Just as important to make sure that everything on top of that truck is far away from any obstruction. Power lines, lightning, trees, anything. Safety first.
And that leads us to our next critical 100% safe behavior expectation. So when we get to a site, radio contact's established. Why is that important? We want to make sure that the studio knows where our crews are in the event of an emergency or in the event they need to contact you. And before you do anything else, you do a physical walk around. You determine that the site is safe or unsafe. It's set up to do a live shot. You're looking for overhead obstructions, bridges, trees, overhead lines. You're taking a look at the pitch of the ground and determining if it's a satisfactory area to set up, as that video clip illustrated. Now, what I usually say with this slide is I say that slide did one of two things. It either pissed you off and you thought that was the dumbest slide you ever saw, or you're thinking, how many times do I have to hear look up and live? And the reason why I did that was every crew that I rode with said the same thing. They say, what do they think, we're morons? We got to be told to look up and live, and it's in everything we look at. And there's a reason for that. We're still having too many incidents. And even though the way we do things in any profession, we do things this way, every once in a while there's a lapse. And that's why it needs to be continually repeated. And if you don't believe me, refer them to the ENG hazard alerts and the Cal OSHA standard and the fatality alert from Ontario, Canada, and talk about that these people are the same, that have got injured, are the same as us. They just made an error at the wrong time. And we've all agreed, we've all made errors in the past. So if anything, it needs to be repeated more and more. And we talked about the importance of building redundancy in, because if somebody does make an error, after you've determined it is a safe area to set up, you do another quick second visual inspection. Takes 30 seconds. But in case you miss something the first time, it gives you an opportunity to catch it before it's too late. Cal OSHA standard says we have to have a spotlight or functionally equivalent means of illumination on all ENG vehicles that have a mast, dish, or similar structure. Illumination shall be adequate to assist you in locating overhead hazards. And one of the things that we're going to show is how valuable these are, as this video illustrates.
I wanted to make a point especially about night. This is shot at natural light. The best weapon you have with safety at night is one of these. First thing you do, hop out of the truck, grab your flashlight, use your spotlight in the truck, look at your dish, then look at your power lines. Too close, 2 to 3 truck lengths away. This is way too close. A simple flashlight or spotlight can save your life. It doesn't take much time at all.
And that's got to be what our culture says. If we get out to a breaking news story and it's dark and we don't have good visibility, and you look and either your spotlight is broken or missing or damaged or taking a walk, and you can't see, the culture's got to be, you don't raise your mast. One of the things that the Cal OSHA standard also requires is pre-operational equipment inspection checks, which means before we take the vehicle out each day, someone's got to go through it. And there's a reason for that. Is it an accident or a predictable event that someone's going to go out on a breaking important news story and find their spotlight's not working? Now we're hoping that the employer is going to say, hey, I can't see, I don't raise my mast. But Cal OSHA said, just in case, we want a pre-operational equipment inspection done first so we can catch these things. Now I don't know how accurate our inspection was, but when we were going through the vehicles, what did we check? Two or three spotlights? One was broken. Wasn't working. And that's why these pre-operational equipment inspections are to be done. There should be a working spotlight, and there should be a flashlight with an extra set of batteries on each vehicle. Certainly if you have strobe lights, and I believe most of your vehicles do have strobe lights, those should be on, and we'll talk more about that later on in the presentation. We talk about work zone safety. And we'll also talk about the need for reflective vests when we get to that portion of the presentation. Our next expectation is simply, you use a spotlight to illuminate overhead so that you can actually see if there's overhead obstructions or overhead lines at night. As part of the site selection process, you have to consider vehicle height, road pitch, and wind. One of the requirements of the Cal OSHA standard is that actually we have to notify what the operator what the height of the vehicle is with the mast extended and with the mast down and stowed.
This means surveying the area before settling on a parking location for the vehicle and before raising the microwave mast or ladder. And you must get out of your vehicle to do the survey. A good practice during the survey is to physically position yourself under the overhead line in question and then pace off the distance to maintain your minimum clearance in order to establish a parking location for the vehicle. If strong winds exist, or if there's the possibility of the wind picking up, you must add several feet to your clearance to account for potential swaying of a mast or ladder. Additionally, if you must park your vehicle on an angle, you must also add several feet to your clearance, as the angle may tilt your mast or ladder toward the overhead line.
And here's where, again, you'd want to reference what the CBS manual says, that for every 5 degrees of slope, we need an additional 5 feet of clearance. And according to the CBS manual, it says that the mast should not be extended to its highest elevation when wind speeds are expected to exceed 30 miles an hour, consider movement by high winds when positioning your vehicle for a live shot. Now in your book, in this handout on page 12, is a photocopy that I got right off the Wilbert website. And basically what it tells you is what the mast is designed for with the appropriate sail area, what wind speeds it's designed to withstand. So this is a good question I usually like to ask the group. What are our masts designed to withstand? A lot of times people don't know. So this would be a good discussion point. But what you also want to talk about is just because the winds are 20 or 30 miles an hour, we also need to know what the gusts are. And here's where you would discuss that. The Cal OSHA standard also requires level indicating devices be provided in an observable location on the ENG vehicle to indicate the level of the vehicle, front to rear, and across the width. This happens to be one model that's out on the market now. Now I just screwed up. So all I do is I hit the right mouse button. Who's going to believe I did that purposely? And hit it again. And here's where we'd want to discuss how we're going to handle this as a station. Where we are, obviously this has got to be done by 12/18/2004. It doesn't have to be that particular model. That's just one on the marketplace now. I'm sorry, what? It just says an observable location. The vehicles that I've seen have usually put them outside. Some of them have just gone with the little bubbles that you would see on a laser, or on a level, excuse me, so that you can kind of get an idea as to how level the site is. I like that one because it actually gives you the degrees of the angle that you're actually parking on, which will help you relay it to the CBS standard, because it's sometimes difficult to see if you're at 5 degrees of slope or 10 degrees of slope. That particular model will actually tell you that. Which leads us to our next expectation, is that for every 5 feet of slope, we give ourselves another additional 5 feet of clearance, and ask why. Simply because the mast is going to extend as you get up closer to the overhead lines. One of the unfortunate consequences, if an error does occur, is that there could be contact with overhead lines. In the back of your book is a bulletin that looks like this. It happens to be from Detroit Edison. One of the things that I would suggest you do is contact your local utility. They may have similar bulletins or different guidelines that you might want to substitute in this place. But this has some pretty good guidelines that I would suggest you go through and highlight and review. This video will also illustrate some of those key points that should be implemented in the event that overhead line is struck by a mast.
This requires some detailed explanation. The rule of thumb is that if you're in an energized vehicle, stay in the vehicle until the utility company arrives to deal with the situation. If conditions are such that you must exit the vehicle, you must be aware of 2 dangers. First, when exiting the vehicle, you must jump clear of the vehicle in order to avoid making simultaneous contact with the earth and the vehicle. And second, you must understand and deal with what is called step potential. As mentioned earlier, electrical current seeks ground. In an energized vehicle, this means that the current will literally burn through the rubber tires as it seeks ground. Once it finds ground, the voltage dissipates over distance. This electrical current is much like the ripples of water that radiate outward from a pebble dropped into a pool of water. The voltage in the ground near the vehicle is greater than the voltage, say, 5 feet from the vehicle. If you were to walk toward or away from the vehicle in a normal fashion, you would encounter a possible voltage differential between one leg and the other, and you could be injured as a result of this step potential. Therefore, as you exit the vehicle, you must try to keep your feet together and parallel to your exit path, and you should literally shuffle away from the vehicle.
And the other potential is contacting down power lines. What do we do? And here's what we'd want to ask the group. What are the potential hazards associated with down power lines? There's only two. One, it tripped out on the way down, or two, it didn't trip out. Whatever is contacting, it's energizing. Can you tell by looking? The answer is no.
Every downed wire must be treated as if it were live. When utility company crews arrive on the scene, they deal with every downed wire as if it were live and dangerous.
So let's recap. In the event that you're in a ENG or SNG truck that contacts an overhead line and you're inside the vehicle, you should generally stay inside the vehicle. You're basically just like a bird on the wire. You're really not in any danger unless you provide a better path to ground. Just because the vehicle is in contact with an overhead line, as the video indicated, the current is going to try to get to ground. So what it's going to do is it's going to burn through the tires. And the tires aren't going to be as effective insulators as you would think, simply because they're made of carbon, which conducts electricity, and they have steel belts. So if you're inside the vehicle, you should stay inside the vehicle. In most cases, you can roll down the window, you can yell for other people to get away and call for help. If you're outside the vehicle, you got to make sure as a trainer that you tell people the biggest mistake that most people who end up dead make is that they run towards the vehicle to see how their buddy inside the vehicle is doing. And that's the worst mistake you can make. If you're outside the vehicle but in close proximity, you shuffle away till you're about 30 yards or so away from the vehicle. You resist the temptation to reach for the mast control switch. Because now if you reach for the mast control switch, this is typically on the side of the vehicle, you're touching the vehicle, you're providing a better path to ground than through those tires, and it's going to go through you. If you're outside the vehicle, keep other people away. If you're inside the vehicle and the vehicle starts on fire, now you may have to exit the vehicle. So what do? The key is to jump outside the vehicle, but jump far enough away so that you don't reach back and touch the vehicle. Because if you do, that's called touch potential. What touch potential is, now you're providing a better path to ground than through those tires. So you want to jump clear of the vehicle without touching it, but you also don't want to do one of these. Because if you do one of those, your front leg, which is farther away from the vehicle, will be at a different voltage potential than your back leg, which is closer to the vehicle, which is why you need to shuffle. So I usually ask this, what are the odds? I don't know if you could tell by looking at me, this is how I do it anyway. Not much of a leaper, not much of a jumper. I never once dunked a basketball. I bet you can't believe that, can you? So if you're anything like me, and you don't jump and you haven't jumped in years, what are the odds of you making that jump if you're wearing shoes like that? I'm not telling you what to wear, but it's certainly a good discussion point. You usually upset somebody. But I think it drives home an important point, too, that you're not going to make that jump in all likelihood wearing impractical shoes.
Can you take your shoes off?
The problem, you could certainly take the shoes off, but if you land on something sharp, is that more likely to cause you to stumble? So let's recap. We need to maintain safe clearances at all times. As the CBS standard says, a minimum of 15 feet, and obviously we're going to need additional clearance levels with higher voltages if the wind starts to pick up, if we're not on level ground. The Cal OSHA standard and the CBS policy says we have to have a working spotlight in the unit, and it has to be utilized to illuminate above the master dish. We have to have 30 seconds to do a complete walk around the vehicle to determine if it's safe to raise the master dish. We want to make sure that we have an adequate spot, that it's adequately level, and that adequate clearance around the vehicle is assured so that the generator exhaust is not blocked. You want to consider road pitch and wind. No matter what you know, if it's a line, you assume it's a power line and you stay away. Most of our vehicles, and perhaps all, I'm not sure, have the DTEC units on them. We're going to talk a little bit about the DTEC units in a minute. The point I want to make here is it's just a piece of electronics. And in your business, you know, if it's electronic, it don't always work the way it's supposed to. So whether we got the DTEC unit on the vehicle or not, we're not going to get away from the need to look up and look. One of the things we want to talk about is we want to follow that Japanese quality model. We want these behaviors 100% of the time. And one of the requirements of the KL/OSHA standard is that we actually, within 1 quarter following this training, we actually go out and audit to see if we're getting these behaviors. And that's what this form is in the back of your book, or in the back of that handout. And that's what we're building this training presentation around, to illustrate what these key behaviors are. It's either on the second page or the last page. So we want to emphasize 100% of the time we want these expectations. It's a zero defect culture. One of the requirements of this training is you talk about what the vehicle safety controls and safety devices are, and what the warnings and indicating lights and alarms are. What I do is cover it generally in this presentation. What you might want to talk about is how you're going to do hands-on training with the operators so that you get a greater familiarity with this, and you should have some sort of documentation where you've checked the person out. The weakness that I've seen when I've done safety audits at network stations is that they check the person out on one vehicle. But if the station has 4 or 5 different types of vehicles, from Wolf Coach or Frontline, we should have a piece of paper for each of those vehicles so that we can document that that person knew how to safely operate that particular kind or style of vehicle. One of the questions that always comes up, and for those of you that are training like the talent, they're going to say, well, why do I need to know what these operating controls and indicating alarms are? Because in a safety culture, if we see an alarm going off, if we see an indicating light flashing, we should be able to ask, why are you moving that vehicle with that indicating light on? Because that's another safety redundant factor that we should be taking advantage of. But most of the talent that I've ever interviewed say, I wouldn't dare do that. That's their job. And hopefully you want to talk about, as a culture, we need to move past that, because everybody's got a safety responsibility. And lastly, we have to complete pre-operation equipment inspections. The checklist is in the handout on the the last page of the handout. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. And one of the expectations at the end is that we actually go through some of these vehicles and see whether, number one, they're in compliance with the KL/OSHA standard now, and number two, whether there are any defects that maybe we can catch using this process. And the value, I think, is illustrated when we looked at spotlights. We looked at 2 or 3. One was defective and wouldn't turn on. How long it was that way, who knows? The KL/OSHA standard says we need to have positive means, such as continuous pressure switches whenever we're going to raise or rotate elevating antennas, dishes, or similar structures, and the switch shall be located so that you can actually watch the master dish as it's elevated. And here are some examples. Now you have 2 options here. Number one, you can take these pictures out and put pictures of your particular station's operating controls, or you can have a break and take them out and show them, or do a hands-on demonstration, whatever you think works best. I just tried to pick some general pictures that would illustrate some of the various mass control devices that are out. This was out of your S&G truck, and we found out later it was broken, but certainly we don't want a mass control switch under the seat. We don't even want it inside the vehicle. And according to KL/OSHA, in 2004, after December, it's not supposed to be there. One of the styles of mass control devices is this continuous pressure switch, which you see in the upper right-hand corner. The nice thing about this is, it's number one, it's tough to bypass, and number two, it requires constant pressure. This style, the older versions were basically just simple toggle switches. All you had to do is flick it up and you can walk away. That would no longer meet the KL/OSHA criteria. Unfortunately, this design, and I don't know if we have any at this particular station, lends itself to being defeated, because if you take a look at the video box, it fits perfectly under that toggle switch so that you can bypass that. We'll talk about that in a second. This style is one, basically it's got three positions, raise, lower, and neutral. The neutral separates the mast from the air compressor. This style won't meet the standard in 2004 because simply to elevate the mast, all you have to do is flick it up. So by 2004, that one will have to be eliminated. This is not a CBS mast control switch. This one was involved in an accident. One of the accidents from another station that we consulted with. And the interesting thing here was, all the other vehicles, you can legibly read what the mast control switch said. This one, you couldn't. And from interviews, found out that every day this mast control switch was being bypassed by a videotape. And it eventually started wearing out the controls. One of the best practices is we make sure that our controls are legibly labeled, but we shouldn't be seeing them wear out on one or two vehicles because that's a telltale sign that something's going on there. Employees should understand how the proximity warning devices function while he's raising the mast or antenna. Basically, these units have three sensors. One is a collision sensor, two is a sensor to detect overhead lines, and three is an ultrasonic proximity switch to detect solid objects. And you want to talk about how, again, we want to check out people to make sure that they can utilize these things correctly. They also have a safety feature built in that stops the mast from elevating when you're at a 10-degree angle or more. One of the challenges here, and here's what you want to talk about, why we can't just rely on these systems, is that they're not foolproof. Sometimes on large, smooth, flat objects, they don't always detect them, and it says that right in the manual. For sleet or rain, sometimes it detects those as heavy object. If the unit collides with something, it may go out of calibration and be less reliable, and as operators, you're certainly going to want to report that. It needs to be kept clear of snow and ice. And I think most telling of all is this warning right out of the manufacturer's manual. It says any one or more of these safety features may fail, so it's not a replacement for common sense and proper safety procedures, which obviously includes look up and lift. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that someone's going to say, geez, I'm under the gun here. I got this mast control switch. It's going to take 10 minutes for that mast to go up, sometimes longer on some of our slower ones. Why don't I just bypass that mast control switch? I have gone out, when I was actually doing this safety presentation and interviews, it was so commonplace, people were just doing it in front of me. And one of the things that I found was I'd interview management first, and management says, our crew never does this. And then I went out there, and man, it was like a religion. So you want to spend some time saying, in the past, we may have done this, but no one's got the right to take a chance with somebody else's life. We can endanger ourselves, we can endanger our coworkers, or we can endanger the general public. And the reason why we want you there is so that if somehow you miss something, your hand's on the switch. The standard says it's got to be adequate enough to illuminate above the mast or antenna.
Does Cal OSHA require proximity devices?
No. There was some thought to making those a requirement of the standard, and they pulled it out simply because what they found was there was some unreliability with these units, and number two, there really wasn't a central listing board like a UL that approved and tested these units. So it's a backup safety device, and that's really the key point that you want to emphasize when you're doing that training. So we don't do this under any circumstances, no matter what. Come on. And that's why our best practice is our hands on the switch at all times when raising the master dish. Now, obviously, after 12/18/2004, this is going to be relatively easy because we're going to have continuous pressure switches in place at all times. Right now, our standard is our hands on that master control switch. The Cal OSHA standard also requires that audible and visual warnings be provided to warn you if someone attempts to move the vehicle while the mast or dish or antenna or similar structure is in the elevated position or not properly stowed. The visual warning's got to be readily visible to the driver or operator, and it's got to be a non-cancelable audible alarm that sounds if somebody shifts out of park while the mast or the antenna is up or not properly stowed. Well, what I did was I tried to illustrate this for some of the people that aren't all that familiar with the vehicles. Here's some common indicating lights that indicate that the mast is up. They're either positioned here or on the dashboard by the mast control switch on the console. And there's also a bunch of indicating lights that, again, the other crew should be familiar with. They tell you whether the jacks are up or down, whether the mast is up or down, whether the antenna is up or down. These audible and visual alarms will be required, as I said before, by 12/18/2004. One of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make is that they rely on these indicating devices alone. And all that tells you is that the air is out of the mast. It doesn't necessarily tell you that the mast is retracted, because the mast could still be up because it's frozen, because it bound up in some way. So you want to make sure that somebody knows to go out and visually verify that the mast is down and the antenna has been properly seated and stowed. This video illustrates some of the...
What's that door? I don't hit anything there. Close up. All right, good. And there's two alarms.
And all I tried to do was to illustrate what some of these flashing lights look like. And the point that you want to make here is, if we see flashing lights, if we hear audible alarms, people shouldn't be continuing to ignore them and continue with the shot. Something's wrong somewhere. I'll tell you a story in a minute. And as a safety culture, everyone has the right to ask what's going on. Never assume that any audible or visual warning, alarm, or mast-up warning system is defective. Went to a accident scene in a Midwest city. What had happened was they had routinely been bypassing the mast control switch by wedging a tape in there. When they closed the panel door, they left the tape in there. It was a large truck, so they left the generator on because one of the persons in the back was going to edit video as they were going to the next shop. Somebody inadvertently forgot to shut the compressor off. Got a series of events going on. They're driving down the road, they hit a bump. Indicating light goes off. Warning alarm starts, the guy cancels it. Indicating light is still going on. Driver assumes because they hit the bump, it was defective. Now the mast is about 10 feet up. They're going down a busy street in Chicago. They continue driving. Alarm's going off again, the guy cancels it again. Person editing video says it's his job, not mine. Doesn't say boo. Mast gets to about 40 feet in the air, just misses an overhead high voltage line and hits a low voltage line, but luckily it shears the mast off and falls, and somehow it didn't hit anything. So nobody got hurt or killed. But obviously the moral of the story is, no matter what, we never assume that an alarm or indicating light is defective. We get out and visually verify. Now, one of the root causes that should have been identified is we knew we were having problems with that. Maintenance was constantly looking at why these indicating lights were going on for no reason. The crew got so used to them, they started ignoring them. So as trainers, you want to talk about, are we having similar problems here? Because we know eventually people are going to ignore these alarms if they continue to go off. Are we in compliance here?
All right, so there is a positive pressure switch.
Yes, you got to physically hold the button down.
That's now.
Are we in compliance with the Cal OSHA standard? Anybody? No. Why not? Mute. Yeah, non-cancelable. which is what contributed to that one accident in Chicago that we talked about. Most common truck design, a lot of people still think, especially those people that have been in the business for a while, think that the mast control is interlocked into the transmission so that you can't physically shift out of park while the mast is in the up position. That's not true in 99% of our vehicles, as far as I know. We can move the vehicle with the mast in the elevated position. Obviously, an audible and a visual alarm has to go off. My question is, and the question that I want you to ask your audience, is when can we do this? Now, I know that everyone says never, but I've gone out and interviewed people, and what they find is, all of a sudden, we don't have a signal. We got the mast 40 feet in the air, and what do? We got 5 minutes. We don't have time to get the mast down, move, and go up. I'm sorry, what? Is that acceptable? And you have to tell them it's not acceptable under no circumstances. Does it happen? It happens. And that's why we need another set of eyes out there. Because if one person's tempted, the other person needs to say, under no circumstances do we move that vehicle with the mast in the elevated position. I had one horror story that I heard where the mast was frozen. They had the reporter out the window like this while the guy was driving down the street. It should never happen. It's just too dangerous. And that's why we also have a teardown procedure in place. It's just as important that we maintain visual contact at all times when lowering the mast or dish, and that we follow applicable teardown procedures, including making sure that the antenna is properly stowed. Best practices. According to the Cal OSHA standard, we're supposed to have a label that tells us what the height of the vehicle is with the mast or dish up and stowed. This is not an acceptable label. It does not meet the standard. Standard requires that we do a documented pre-operational equipment inspection. The standard also requires that we have a vehicle safety manual inside the vehicle, and that's what we have up there. And we should also have the operations manual for each vehicle, such as that binder that she's going to hold up in a second. And that should be available in each vehicle for consultation. Standard also requires our danger warning be posted in proximity to where the mast control switch is. So if you don't have these, you certainly want to make sure that these get posted. Our next behavior expectation is that pre-operation equipment inspections are completed and that identified deficiencies are reported. Now you want to spend some time here, because a lot of times, what's the thing people do? They draw a line down, they get in the vehicle, and then they drive off to do what they do. Or they complete this in the way back in the parking lot. You want to emphasize from a liability standpoint and from a safety culture standpoint, that's your job. And you need to spend the 5 minutes or so making sure that that vehicle is safe to take out. I did an audit of an Eastern station. One of the things I found is they were actually doing these inspections, and the crew would write down defective mast control switch. And I said, hey, this is great. And then I looked, next month, defective mast control switch. And I looked, next month, defective mast, and they kept on taking the vehicle out. Now, if you want to invent a herd of lawyers to come into your facility, you can't do that. If there's a problem, we need to just tell who they need to report it to, and a decision has to be made. My suggestion is err on the side of caution. Don't let a vehicle with a safety defect that you've documented go out. We talked about the hazards of high voltage. A lot of times people can certainly understand what the hazards of high voltage are, but we don't always associate the hazards with low voltage. The only difference between getting dead by high voltage and low voltage is in a high voltage fatality, you probably got a closed casket, and a low voltage one, you probably look a little prettier and you're an open casket. You're still dead. Why? Because it's not the voltage that kills you. It's the current. And a surprisingly small amount of current can kill you. And how does this typically happen? Well, you got a defective tool. That third wire is designed to transfer that leaking current back and down the ground. But if you're wet and sweaty, and if there's a defect in that cord, or if there's a defect in that cord, that current can go through you. Which is why one of our expectations is that we check our cord sets. They get beat up badly. Current takes the easiest and quickest path to ground, whether it's through you or whether it's through a conductor. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, especially if we cover a lot of stories in old neighborhoods where a lot of the houses or areas we're shooting from only have two-prong outlets, first thing to go is that ground plug. And I've also noticed how beat up our cords get. I inspected maybe 1 or 2 trucks here, and each one had at least one defective cord set, which we'll show you in a minute. Ground fault circuit interrupters. I would think that most vehicles, or most ENG vehicles with external outlets used to power our cord sets should have ground fault interruption. Ground fault provides you with a level of protection that circuit breakers do not, because circuit breakers are designed to prevent fires. Ground faults, circuit interrupters are designed to prevent electrocution because they trip at a very small amount of current leakage. With the slide that we're going to show you in a second, basically will show you when a circuit breaker trips versus when a ground fault interrupted switch trips. These were some of the cords that we found on your vehicles. Obviously, we didn't even look all that hard. We have cut insulation here. We have exposed wirings here. These are standard outlets. These trip anywhere, I didn't check the breaker panel, but anywhere from 15 to 50 amps, I would imagine, depending upon the setting and the breaker size. Here's obviously a ground fault outlet. This won't trip until you're long dead in most instances, because this doesn't trip until, even if it's a 15 amp breaker, it's not going to trip until 15,000 milliamps. Death usually happens somewhere in the 150 milliamp range. So a circuit breaker is not going to trip for a long time before that hazardous current goes through your body. Here's the, you ever watch those horrible grade B movies? 25 to 30 milliamps is when you can't let go. If you see somebody that can't let go, you got to resist the temptation to reach out and grab them, but run back into the truck and shut off the breaker. Circuit breakers don't protect you against electrocution. Step and touch potential. This is right out of the Cal/OSHA standard. Basically what it says is if you're standing on the ground and you touch any portion of that truck, because you conduct electricity, because you're 90% water, that current is likely to flow through you to ground. And step potential is if one leg is closer to the vehicle than the other leg, it's going to be at a higher voltage differential than the back foot. And because of you having that spacing between your legs, it could cause a voltage differential, which could cause the current to flow through you, which is why you shuffle or hop away from the vehicle.
Now what about lightning? What should you do if you're out on a live shot and there's lightning in the area?
Odds of getting struck. You hear people, yeah, you have a better chance of getting struck by by lightning. Well, that's true maybe for the general public, but it's not true for us. Statistically, about 1 out of every 600,000 people get struck by lightning each year, and a small percentage of them get killed. Most suffer some long-term ailments. But we have a much greater potential in our industry. Why? Well, we're typically the tallest object in the area. To get line of sight, normally we want to be. A lot of times we're out in the open. We got a lightning attractor 40 to 50 feet up in the air. So our odds are much greater. That's why the CBS manual says if lightning is within 3 miles away, we need to go to immediate shutdown of electronics and seek shelter. Here's where you'd want them to highlight what the CBS manual says. Basically what it says is you count the number of seconds between the flash and the boom, divide by 5, and that'll tell you approximately how far away the lightning is. You want to talk about some basic lightning tips, where you should be and where you should avoid. I did it again. Certainly you want to avoid wide open areas. You don't want to be the tallest object in the area. You want to stay away from trees. Studies show that in a typical lightning storm, tall objects like the Empire State Building get struck numerous times. If lightning's in the area, we don't want the mast up. You certainly want to avoid being near water. You want to avoid large open areas whenever possible. You want to talk about how our culture will support this. At some of the stations where I've done this training, they actually showed some video where, hey, we sent a crew out to do a live shot on this electrical storm. Lightning was in the area. They go back to the anchor and says, we couldn't give you a live shot. Some stations say, well, what are you talking about? We send people out to cover this. So we want to have a good discussion about the hazards and the magnitudes of lightning. And you want to emphasize that if you feel it's unsafe or if lightning's in the area, the culture's going to support you. If your hair stands on end and you're connected, that means lightning's really in the area. You want to disconnect from whatever you're doing, separate from each other, crouch down, and talk to each other. Make sure that if a lightning or electrical storm is approaching, we know we got a crew out in the middle of nowhere, a phone call or something would be a wonderful objective. Lightning can strike anywhere in the country. The most severe is Florida. Certainly if you're in these areas, you want to talk about how we have a special duty to make sure that we don't end up being a statistic. Falls. We talked a lot about some of our hazards. We haven't really talked about falls yet. Rose makes fall protection equipment. This is in one of their technical briefs. It says accidental fall occurs without knowledge to the victim or announcement. You can't control the way your fall starts, your speed, your direction, or body orientation. Now, when I first read that, your reaction may be the same as mine. Duh. But there's actually a point here. Human reaction time is 0.61 seconds. What's that mean? Well, let's say you're up on the set truck. You start to lose your balance. Your mind says, hey, hand, reach out and grab something. 0.61 seconds has elapsed. How far have you fallen? Here's where I would suggest you have prizes or something to get people interested. You've fallen 6 feet. So if you're on one of these trucks, you're more than halfway down. Your reaction time isn't going to save you. You know how we talked about sometimes we underestimate the true magnitude of the hazard? White and Bowden did a study. And these guys were great. How they got funded, I never know. But what they did was they got cadavers, and they dropped them on a hard surface. What their objective was, they wanted to see when 50% of the cadavers they dropped would have died. And what they found is 50% of the people died when you reach a speed of 18 miles an hour. How far do you have to fall to reach a speed of 18 miles an hour? 5 feet, which is somewhere in between our SAT truck and our ENG truck, which is why OSHA came up with a standard, which they're going to be modifying, as he talked about in the beginning, that if you're 4 feet or more, you're supposed to have guardrails or other fall protection equipment in place. Now that's easy to do, or it's relatively easy to do in a shop where you can put a harness, a lanyard, and an anchor's point on for the maintenance guy. How do you do that in the field? It's almost impossible. Which is why our standard is we don't do live shots off the vehicle roofs. There shouldn't be that many reasons to go up there in the first place anyway while you're out in the field. The most common is for mast freeze-up. And if masts are freezing up, it's probably because they haven't been properly winterized. You might want to talk a little bit about that, especially if you're in the maintenance side of the field. If you do have a mast freeze up, you want to talk about how you dump the air out of the compressor, rock the vehicle. That should work in most cases. And if that doesn't work, you want to have them call you for assistance and guidance. If you do climb the ladder, you want to talk about the importance of 3-point contact. 2 hands on 1 foot or both feet in 1 hand in contact with the ladder at all times. We want to talk about that our policy is not to do live shots, and that each location is supposed to have a fall protection work plan. So if we are sending people up there to either service or maintain the vehicles, we got to come up with some way to prevent them from falling. And certainly, that type of access on a SAT truck is less than desirable as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, it's right here. These are pictures, usually most of them from the Super Bowl. One of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make is that they just run the cable. And they say, well, I can see it, everybody can see it. And that's not necessarily so. A lot of people are visually challenged. A fall could result in hip breaking or whatnot. So you want to avoid long runs down sidewalks, especially when there are other areas to run your cable. If you do cross the sidewalk, you want to make them taped. And these are two shots from the Super Bowl, which I thought were kind of good, where they're yellow jacketing or matting them down because they were there for long-term exposure. Our best practice is that we tape it to avoid being tripped, becoming a tripping hazard, or being caught by passing vehicles. You also want to talk about proper setup. We had a couple of claims that I know we've paid in the past where it was a crowded site. The person had a long run of cable out, and what they did was they did one of these just as somebody was stepping on the cable. So if it's a crowded scene, you might want to wait until it's cleared out a little bit before you start reeling in your cable.
It was unusual, but they did it for the fans. The Staples Center broadcast the Laker game on the widescreen outside for 10,000 people. At first, the crowd was relatively peaceful, but 20 minutes after the game ended, the mood turned ugly. In 4 locations on 11th Street near Figueroa, bonfires burned. As we were recording, photographer Chris Zamorano and I were shoved. From then on, we carried the camera at knee level to avoid being targets. The LAPD in riot gear surrounded the Staples Center. When motorcycle officers moved in, the mob got aggressive, throwing bottles at police. Moments later, the police pulled back, and the crowd stampeded. Hundreds of people were running, trampling everything in their path. They were headed for our CBS 2 news van. The mob started rocking the vehicle, then attacked the limousine parked in front of us. When the driver tried to stop them, he became the target. Meanwhile, one man climbed on top of our van. The windows of the van were smashed, everything inside stolen or destroyed. They tried to set the van on fire, but failed. They were successful in igniting an SUV belonging to Reuters news service, parked behind us. The flames didn't seem to satisfy them. They added fuel to the fire. Even as riot police moved in, the crowd seemed to take pride in their destruction.
See that happen in LA? See that? Wait till next year, dog!
In Los Angeles, Helen Kumari, CBS 2.
What you want to talk about here is that maybe the culture in the old days was we get the story at all costs. But that culture doesn't exist anymore. And we need to plan ahead when it's a foreseeable event so that we don't put our people in harm's way. And you want to emphasize that it's just not worth it. It is not worth to put ourselves in harm's way. Especially when it's a foreseeable event. And why? Where's homicide rank in this country with respect to occupational deaths? I'll tell you the answer. Second, we don't normally anticipate homicide as a leading cause of industrial accidents or occupational accidents. So we want to have some basic common sense guidelines. We want to have our credentials displayed. We want to make sure that our cameras don't walk away. 20, 30, or 40 grand a pop. We at least want to keep them locked up and under proper care whenever possible. We want to cooperate with public safety officials, but we don't want to do anything that we're not trained to do. We certainly don't want to intervene in anything that we're not authorized to. We certainly don't want to block access to areas by fire trucks or whatnot. We don't want to run over fire hoses. NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, did a study on occupational violence. And the basic conclusion of the report was we must change the way work is done in certain settings to minimize the risk of workplace violence. We need a dialogue of continuous improvement, shifting from reactionary to prevention. Basically what NIOSH found was most companies do something after somebody gets killed. And they're saying, hey, wait a second, let's step back and take a look at this. So, what are best practices? What can we realistically do? Well, if it's a foreseeable event, we should certainly be contacting corporate safety to talk about, hey, this thing's got potential riot written all over it. What should we do? And there should be some common sense protocols as far as I'm concerned. If you don't feel safe to set up in an area, call the assignment desk. If you don't feel safe, wait until somebody else from the crew gets there. Call the assignment desk to see maybe this could be a tape shot versus a live shot so that we have an opportunity to get out of there quickly in the event a mob gets unruly. Here's what I want to talk about. What can we do? And here's where you'd want to try to get some group interaction. Because there are some things that should be commonplace. Now, NIOSH didn't specifically mention the broadcast industry, but what they found was people that work in workplaces that have these attributes are most likely to get killed. And if you think about it, this translates pretty close to what we do. We're mobile, we work alone, we certainly cover stories in high crime areas, we have valuable cameras, we often work late at night. Well, I don't know if you work with unstable people, but you certainly cover them. And you're out in some of the worst neighborhoods. I think this needs to be something that we're continually talking about and working to get better at. And that's the point of that slide. And we're going to talk about this more in a second, but if you're working out along the shoulder of the road, you need to have a reflective vest on. One of the things when I did a study of this, and I went through a couple of stations, vehicles, head to toe, I found that these vests were there, but they weren't ever taken out of the bag. They were never used, but they were there. And that's why our best practice is to have them worn, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Our practice is, if you're working on or along the shoulder of the road, and it's night or reduced visibility, you wear your reflective vest. And now here's where you'd want to interact with the audience. Is this happening? From what I've seen at other stations, it's not. Now I'm going to go through a couple of these slides real quick. If you have a cold weather, I noticed there was somebody from Utah here. If you have some cold weather exposures, you're going to want to talk about what the CBS ENG manual says. It talks about how we don't have any special driving privileges. We have to honor bans. We have to have emergency equipment, storm survival equipment if hazardous wind chills are expected. It talks about how to properly layer your clothing and dress accordingly, how to minimize your potential for frostbite. Talks about the low-hanging branches that are likely to occur in the event of an ice storm. This is a good slide to talk about how quick wind chill or frostbite occurs based upon wind chill and temperature. And when you're 30 minutes or less, that's a hazardous wind chill as far as I'm concerned. And here's where you might want to spend some time talking about what the CBS manual says. Wildfires. The amazing thing about wildfires is how fast they move. And the CBS manual basically says each station is supposed to do an assessment. And if you find that it's reasonably likely for our people to be covering these types of events, we need to come up with training and make sure that they have appropriate equipment in place. Because minor threats can escalate quickly. We certainly want to train our people not to go into fire lanes without a trained escort. We want to make sure that they check in at the field command post. We want to make sure that they have proper dress and PPE. PPE would include goggles and/or safety glasses and perhaps a respirator or dust mask. And if they are, they should be included within the respirator program that's part of your station. And if you're likely to cover these, we should have specific policies and training in place. Certainly, we should have these policies in place if we're in a high-risk area, as shown in this slide, which comes out every year, so I'll have to put a new one in. Certainly, significant portions of this area are high-risk areas. Working outdoors, leading causes cancer, skin cancer. Most cancers in this country are declining. Skin cancer is elevating or increasing significantly. So I want to talk about some basic things that are in the CBS manual, like wearing sunscreen, protecting yourself by wearing proper clothes, using sunglasses and a hat, and if you're especially a high-risk person, redheaded, light-colored eyes, large moles, you want to be especially cautious. Some of this stuff I'm going through quickly because I tell you exactly what to say, and it's right in the manual. Heat stress. Basically, what's heat stress? Basically, your body's got to maintain an internal temperature in a real small frame. A few degrees either way, and you could be in trouble. Which is why heat stress is an important topic in the summer. Most people have to be at 98.6. I can't maintain the proper temperature. So what's it do? It diverts blood from your organs to your skin. It tries to make you sweat more. Your heart starts to pump faster to increase respiration rates. And certainly, we want to make sure that people understand what they should be doing. They should be drinking plenty of water. During periods of hot weather, you drink about a cup of water every 15 minutes. You avoid coffee, tea, caffeinated soft drinks, alcoholic beverages, and you wear proper clothing. Take the cooling breaks. And you should train people to recognize the symptoms. And the most important symptoms to recognize are those of heat stroke. That could be severe headache, confusion, fatigue, flushed face. And the most telltale sign is everybody else is sweating and this person stopped. And their skin is hot and dry. That's an indication that you better get this person to the doctor because they're likely to sustain heat stroke if they keep on being exposed to the temperatures they're being exposed to. The CBS manual has some specific, and I know everybody laughs, like what the hell are you talking about this? This is actually in the California standard with respect to recognizing hazards associated with wild animals, stinging or swarming insects. And the stinging and swarming insects, that could be critical. If you don't know if you're allergic and you get stung, and your lips start to swell, or you have tightness in your throat or difficulty breathing, those are the first signs of an allergic reaction. So you want to talk about what some of these symptoms are. We'll talk about what our hazardous plants are, and certainly I would try to tie in some of your HAZCOM training to hazardous substances and spills and covering these types of emergency events, so we at least have some basic protocols in place. We should be able to make sure that people recognize what the labels are, that they stand uphill, never downhill, never downwind, and they only set up in areas that they're designated to set up in. You might want to spend a little time talking about some of those things. Poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac, they basically all have urushiol, and there's some real good guidelines in your safety manual as to how to avoid this, how to protect yourself, how to recognize the symptoms, and what you should do in the event of contacting poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac. Per the manual, rash develops in 3 out of 4 people. The symptoms are itchy, followed by red pimples, and followed by blisters. If it's untreated, lasts 3 to 5 weeks. If you have a severe reaction, and the most telltale sign of a severe reaction is if your eyes start to swell, you're especially sensitive and you might want to get special treatment, or at least have a doctor see you. If you're having minimal reaction, which is basically minor breakout and itching, the manual tells you exactly what you should do. And certainly we want to talk about planning ahead so that we know what these plants look like, where they are, and what we should do. Because if you've ever had this, you don't want it. Lyme disease, caused by blood-feeding ticks. They're prevalent in about 48 states out of 50 have had incidents of Lyme disease. They look like that, and here's what the actual size of these things are. Those ticks cause Lyme disease. The most telltale sign of Lyme disease is what we call this bullseye rash. About 80% of the population gets this. The others may not get that rash, but they'll develop flu-like symptoms. If you've been out in brushy areas and you start to feel like you got the flu, you might want to suspect it could be a case of Lyme disease. Treat it. It's very easily treated with antibiotics. We certainly want to spend some time on this if we're in high or moderate risk areas. But certainly we have some in this area as considered high-risk areas. So what do? We avoid bushy, overgrown areas. We wear light-colored clothes because these things are black so you can see them. You basically leave your exposed skin to a minimum. You wear closed shoes. We should make sure that there's spray tick repellent on board or in the first aid kit. And we should also have these tick removal tweezers. Because once the tick burrows inside you, you have a certain period of time to get it out, because the longer he's in there, the more likely you are to sustain Lyme disease. So what you do is you take these tweezers and you don't yank, because you're liable just to take a piece of them off, but you gently wiggle until you can extract the tick. Carbon monoxide. Talk about some of the generator safe work practices. Making sure air inlets and outlets are clear are probably the most important thing to talk about. You want to also have a little bit of a discussion about making sure that you don't power up the generator that you only power the generator up without a load and let it run until the voltage is stabilized. And to avoid inadvertent raising of the mast, you don't run the vehicle with the compressor or drive the vehicle with the compressor on. What is carbon monoxide? It's colorless, odorless gas caused by incomplete combustion. What are the symptoms? Headache, nausea, basically similar to the flu-like symptoms. What do you do if the symptoms occur? The first thing you do is ask anybody else if they're starting to feel sick. If you've been running the vehicle for a while, and it's a day without a lot of air movement, I would suspect carbon monoxide poisoning, and at that point you want to get as far away from the vehicle as you can. Best practice, as far as I'm concerned, is every ENG vehicle and every vehicle with a generator should have a carbon monoxide detector. The manual says they're supposed to be in the vehicles. The ones that I've surveyed, they weren't in the vehicles. So this would certainly be something that we should bring home. Another best practice, whenever possible, have the exhaust on the non-working side of the vehicle, and you certainly don't want it underneath the vehicle like that showed. Here's our best practices. We check our cables. We make sure that we selected a well-ventilated area prior to turning on the generator. We don't operate the mast at greater operating pressure than it's designed to by the manufacturer, which is usually 35 pounds. Conversely, the more common problem is that the masts leak like a sieve. You want to make sure that you're reporting these as well. Masts shouldn't be rocketing. If they're starting to rocket, I mean, somebody's probably been playing around with the controls. You want to make sure that they elevate in a slow, proper manner the way they're supposed to. Where the vehicle accidents rank? Well, you probably guessed it, number 1. You want to talk about here, and you want to spend a little time talking about the importance of driving safely. You want to talk about how much our vehicles weigh in relation to everybody else's vehicles. We get in a match with a Hyundai, we're going to win. And that's why we have a duty to operate our vehicles safely. Our vehicles are going to take much longer to stop. And I'm going to show you a slide that talks a little bit about this. We want to spend a little time talking about what our accident reporting procedures are and how we need these accident reporting kits in our vehicles. You want to talk about how we have a duty to maintain our vehicles under the gross vehicle weight rating. Basically, a manufacturer designs a vehicle with a maximum weight intended for handling and stopping purposes. We don't want to exceed these weights. When I did this survey at one station, we found 3 of their vehicles were overweight because they brought in a truck scale. From a liability standpoint, you want to make sure that we're keeping our vehicles under our gross vehicle weight rating. Because from a liability standpoint, if we get involved in a rear-end accident and we're overweight, that certainly increases the likelihood of damages on us. We have a cell phone policy. Cell phones, we should really avoid using them while we're driving, or we should certainly only use them in hands-free mode. There's been all kinds of studies coming out recently that you're about 4 times more likely to be in an accident, and improper cell phone use results in about 6% of accidents. There's also a new push. Driving while fatigued is going to be the next thing you're going to start seeing more and more of. This just came out. According to research, and this is right on the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, driving in any shift should generally not exceed 12 hours. So basically what they're saying is the combination of working and driving shouldn't exceed 12 hours in most people. And there are some actual regulations established by DOT if our vehicles are over 10,001 pounds, which we'll talk about in a second. The culture is we pull and work as many hours as we can possibly work. And you might want to at least have a group discussion so we can at least agree upon when is enough. Are we defensive drivers? We need to follow the speed limits, especially with the weight of our vehicles. It all depends upon whether you're driving a DOT-regulated vehicle or not. That is a vehicle over 10,001 pounds, which is basically going to be our SAT trucks. And if you want to see what these DOT requirements are, if you take a look at page 13 in that little handout I gave you, it shows you what the Federal Motor Carrier regulations are and what we're required to do.
Just for, make sure everybody understands, Jim Staub, if you haven't met him as yet, Jim Staub is responsible for like the vehicle safety program. He's works out of the corporate office, and anytime that you need an answer to these very specific and up-to-date changes, Jim Staub, what's your phone number?
I have business cards with me today. The number's 412-642-4968.
The vast majority of times we're not going to be regulated, but I think driving while fatigued is still an important factor to talk about in all of your groups. And ask people, are you a defensive driver? By maintaining adequate following distance so you have an out in case somebody does something stupid, because we're professionals. Talk about our accident reporting procedures, and talk about stopping distances. If you're driving 65 miles an hour, how long is it going to, how many feet are you going to go just in the time that you sense, hey, move your foot off the gas and put in the brake? How far have you gone? Well, you've already gone 71 feet and you haven't done anything yet. And if you take this to put us on wet pavement, add another 380 feet. Best case scenario, you're looking at almost 500 feet to stop. Which is why maintaining following distance is so important. No matter how fast our vehicles go, and why you would want that on this, I got this at the Super Bowl. Why you would want this on the side of your SAT truck is beyond me. 81.7 miles, I don't care how fast they go. We don't operate our vehicles in excess of the speed limit, simply because of the stopping distances that we're going to encounter. The Cal OSHA standard requires you to talk about the similarities and differences associated with ENG vehicles and versus driving a regular car. Obviously, we want to use seatbelt. We want to follow defensive driving practices. We have to follow emergency driving bans. We follow all speed limits, especially traffic logs. We don't want to have fatigued drivers. We don't want people driving with cell phones. And then you want to talk about some of the important differences. And a good question to ask here is it acceptable to prop up a vehicle with the jacks while you're under overhead lines to try to gain clearance to the overhead lines? You know how sometimes people prop up the vehicle on one side so that you can go this way with the jacks? Is that acceptable? You never want to build in clearance by either going up on a curb or trying to tilt the vehicle with the jacks to go that way, simply because if they fail, it could send the vehicle, the mast into overhead lines. And DOT compliance, how do you tell how much your vehicle weighs? There's a little panel on the inside of the doorway. Are you a defensive driver? And here's where we're going to spend some time talking about each of the points. And again, I'm going through some of this fast. Hopefully you're going to have some group discussions as to what constitutes a defensive driver. As far as I'm concerned, this should be a separate and in-depth procedure. Here you want a training program. Basically here you want to just spend a little time talking about what we need to do. And basically the most common scenario is we're on the shoulder of the road, which basically according to our policy says reflective vests need to be worn. A warning sign such as road work ahead should be used. Rotating and strobe lights should be on for the duration that the vehicle is parked. And you want to spend some time making sure that this is documented, as all training should be, because if it's not documented, it's not done. Certainly any site that we select should not create a safety hazard or a traffic hazard. The field crew should appropriately address all vehicular and pedestrian traffic hazards following that work zone safety standard that you really should talk about. We shouldn't partially park our vehicle on a curb. Why? A few inches of truck movement could send the mast and overhead lines. A trick that a lot of people use is they position the vehicle on a curb to avoid overhead lines. And again, that's not a good practice to follow. And if you do sit in an illegal area on the sidewalk, you want to make sure that you've obtained police permission first. Emergency equipment in a vehicle is not very good if it's not there. So one of our pre-operational equipment inspections is that we maintain the equipment that we're supposed to have in the vehicle. There was also at least one fatality where somebody put their mast in an overhead line and then ran to get the fire extinguisher and ended up getting electrocuted. So you certainly don't want to utilize an extinguisher for that purpose. It's strictly for putting out small fires. Talk about some of the best practices that I've seen: establishing safety committees, establishing employee safety responsibilities. I bet you a lot of people don't even know that there's that safety responsibility section in the CBS manual. So you might want to spend a little bit of time highlighting and going over what some of the key expectations are. Because what have we done? We've integrated safety into everybody's job. And a lot of people need to know that so they can see how the culture is changing. Talk about our pre-operation equipment inspections and the importance of doing these. We should have a hazard reporting procedure or equipment malfunction report, and if you do, you want to spend a little time talking about how to use that. I would suggest that we should have a safety suggestion procedure and orientation. Somebody said it earlier. We get a new person in, they shouldn't be allowed to go out until they've gone through this training. And certainly want to communicate between departments so we understand what everyone's up against. And you really need to emphasize, we need to understand what's really important. Stories come and go, but the tragic consequences of some of these ENG accidents can last a lifetime. We want to make sure that, number one, we don't risk our health or our well-being. Going to be a short, no, there's not going to be a test. But as part of this standard, we're required to go out within the next quarter following the training to do the annual field inspection. And you want to emphasize to the people that whether we're out there with this inspection form or not, it's a California requirement that we do it, but we expect these behaviors whether someone's looking over your shoulder or not. And that's really the key point you want to emphasize there. And that we expect field crews to be familiar with hazards common to ENG vehicles, what the mass problems could potentially be, and what they should do. Here's where I like to use this slide to just talk about what challenges do we have in giving these performance behaviors 100% of the time. Can we realistically do this and open it up to the floor? You're going to be amazed at what a lot of people are thinking. And I'd write them down and deal with them. That's the presentation. I thank you. It took us a little longer than normal. I think we got a 10-minute delay, and obviously with the changing of the tape, so hopefully I didn't go into your breaks. What we want to do now, does anybody have any questions?
The question is, if you do put in guardrails on a walking working surface, it has to meet a certain code. 200-pound force. It has to be, inspected. That's one alternative. But if it's done infrequently, is it worth it?
Trains don't meet it.
They don't meet it from the standpoint of the 200-pound force. Now, if you're using it for leading edge to where you're giving a warning, that's one thing. Or is it better to put a harness on and hook yourself onto a short lanyard to the
so that you can't reach the edge.
So you can't fall on. I mean, but that's a decision that you can make and talk to me about or talk to Wendy about. But I don't think you need it that often. At least when I talk to people, they don't tell me that they do that
That's
that often.
That's really the goal. There really shouldn't be that many reasons to go up there while you're on the field anyway. And if there is, there's probably something wrong. Any questions? Yeah.
Off-road? Taking a vehicle off-road? Dirt?
And that wasn't a requirement that we include in this standard.
Some of the drivers in a situation where they're trying to get close to the fires, getting off-road on a dirt road, and safety issues involved.
So there's special safety issues that have that. Is that what you're saying?
I think there's special safety issues covering live fires or wildfires as a whole, and I really think that needs to be covered as a separate training topic, because you're getting into personal protective equipment, you're getting into potential different personal protective equipment, such as fire blankets, such as respirators, such as special PPE, special clothing, like you don't wear synthetic fabrics or fibers or nylons, and that really needs to be covered, especially if you're in a high-prone wildfire area, as a separate training
And
topic.
we do talk about it in the safety manual as far as those kinds of things as PPE, but we also want to make sure that if you're going in there, that you are escorted. So
Right.
you're not going in unescorted, so no one knows you're involved.
And we're open, to talk about that and help you prepare, but we can't anticipate every one of your
Right.
activities. So you have to open up and tell us, or collectively get from your people, what are the issues? And let's bring it on the let's bring it together and talk about it and solve it. We had this ENG safety guidelines for many years, and the result of thinking about people bringing it to our attention and saying, that is a hazard. We also trained the radio people across the board, because it was recognized that a lot of times on the radio side, you have very young people. And you start talking about the power lines, and you say, well, if you come in contact with it, you could be electrocuted. Well, I thought they were coated. I thought there was a rubber coating on it. I didn't think that would hurt me. So you got to get to the level where they're at. And sometimes, you anticipate that they have the same knowledge as you do, but you have to break that barrier and get to a common ground. And that's part of the trainer type issues that you're going to do it. So what is expected of you to go back? By August you should start thinking about, start planning how you're going to do your training. Now, should you give it all at one time? That's fine. But or you can break it up depending on, the number of the people that you can get in. But you want to be able to be complete by the end of August. That's the target date. You got the following quarter to do that. Whoever you're training, whether you're going to do your own inspection, whether you're going to train other people to do inspection, that needs to be complete within the next quarter.
The quarter following the training.
Right. Now, next year, when you do the annual, let's say you're going to do it again in August, you can do it, you're going to have a wider range to do the inspection. You can do it 1 quarter before and 1 quarter after. So you're going to have 6 months period, so you can spread it out a little bit further. You're going to go out, someone's going to go out, whoever your inspector is, and go out physically and meet with the operation, whoever's operating the van or whoever's in there, and go through a review of this daily of this annual checklist, but you're also looking at the vehicle itself. If it's defective, meaning that there are some things that are not up to what Cal OSHA wants, then that needs to be put on a list and needs to be scheduled to be upgraded or fixed and so on. So it's a combination between looking at the vehicle and the personnel. And it's more of the, did the person do everything on the checklist that we're going to go through on hands-on?
And on page 14 and 15 in the handout that I gave you in the blue folder shows the 2 forms we're going to use. One is the annual safety inspection form that has to be done 1 quarter after this training, and the other one is the daily pre-operational equipment inspection that should be done prior to taking the vehicle out.
Yeah, so you do that daily one, and you obviously you'd have to have enough to do for each vehicle. You put it in a file that if you have to pull it out to show to somebody, OSHA investigation, or if we're coming around doing an audit or a review of the site, Jim Staub or Wendy or myself may be out there looking at it and say, we want to see your daily inspection. So we're not doing it just to be nasty or anything, but we want to make sure it's in there, because if in a situation where it comes in question, whether was that ever done or why wasn't it picked up on the inspection? Like I said, when we go through and look at these vans, like Vince was saying, that some of the spotlights were one of them broken. Well, okay, if you find that as a problem, that needs to be corrected. It needs to be documented. Now, how long do you keep that? Well, on an annual basis, you're going to be doing this inspection. So you may want to, after 1 year, replace those daily inspections. So when you're doing the evaluation for the entire program on an annual basis, that's the time that records that you can get removed because your files are going to be tremendous. Then you can just get rid of that and just replace it with the next year's inspections.
And what I would suggest that you do is when you get to this slide, pull out this work zone safety procedure and go through those scenarios, point out the illustrations, which didn't show up very good on my PowerPoint, so I didn't include them, and go through how we're going to handle each of the scenarios that are covered in this work zone safety procedure.
The MUTCD is Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It doesn't even talk about triangles. Okay, this is something we thought, well, it'd be good for a truck or somebody if you're going to use it, not only if you're actually doing some work on the shoulder of the road, but also if you break down. You know, if you break down, you need to make sure that you're protected while you're waiting for help. But these cones that you have right in front of you, you know, they may meet the MUTCD, and they're a lot easier to haul around. You just take them out and place them so many feet out, which is described in the procedure.
Write down this number, 716 681 4488. If you have problems with PowerPoint, if you're stuck, call me. I'll help you.